If COVID-19 is a message from God, what is the message? By KATHRYN LOFTON and GENEVIÈVE ZUBRZYCKI. People pray during a rosary in the gardens of the Vatican led by Pope Francis. Pope Francis is reading a special prayer for the end of the coronavirus pandemic surrounded by a representative sampling group of those on the front lines in the largest gathering after the lockdown to date. Nearly 2/3 of Americans believe the COVID-19 pandemic is a message from God. But they disagree on the message. The vast majority of Americans continue to believe in God, and the current pandemic has reinforced that belief for many, according to a recent survey we conducted with the Associated Press Center for the Study of Public Affairs. NORC. Most believers in our poll are confident that God will protect them from infection during this pandemic. Believers also think that God is telling mankind to change the way we live. Many religions try to explain why suffering exists, and why bad things happen even to good people. Theologians call this policy, a term that means, justifying God. So it's no surprise that Americans are trying to make sense of the health crisis by turning to their religion. What's surprising are the explanations that believers don't offer. None of the typical enemies has a strong statistic showing in our study. We can expect people to interpret the global pandemic as God's punishment for man's sins. But only 11% of those polled mentioned sin as the cause of the pandemic. Of all the religious groups surveyed, those who identified as Protestant Christians were most supportive of that explanation, but even then only a small number, 15%, identified sin of man as a cause. We can also expect believers to turn to scapegoats, another common way of understanding public health crises. During the height of the Black Death in Europe, from 1348 to 1351, more than 200 Jewish communities were exterminated after their members were accused of intentionally spreading disease by poisoning wells. When the plague re-emerged in the 16th and 17th centuries, conspiracy theories circulated about doctors and medical personnel, including cleaners and grave pickers, believed to have caused the disease because personal interests. Harassment and violence against Asian Americans have occurred since the coronavirus outbreak, and a number of conspiracy theories have surfaced on social media blaming Chinese, Jews, and others. Others have invented or intentionally spread the virus. In India and South Korea, religious minorities have been accused of spreading the virus. In the United States, the number of Americans who blame members of religious minorities is very low, at 3%. Americans also don't blame much on climate change, 7%, or immigration, 9%. Global trade, 21%, and natural, 28%, are higher on the list, but not the main reasons. So who is to blame? Americans mostly point the finger at the actions of governments, both their own, 37%, and those of foreign nations, 43%. But respondents' religious affiliation worked here. White Protestants were more likely to blame foreign governments, 50%, than to blame their own, 20%. Believers of other religions are neutral, and non-believers are more likely to blame their government, 49%, than foreigners, 41%. At a time when we are faced with economic and health crises that require coordination and community, the problem seems to be that we cannot agree on the kind of governance we want. Americans agree that God is watching, but not exactly about what to do to make a better country. KATHRYN LOFTON is a professor of religious studies, aesthetics, history, and theology at Yale University. GENEVIÈVE ZUBRZYCKI is a professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Michigan. Other contributors are Craig Bayerlein, Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Notre Dame and Director of the Center for Religious and Social Studies, and David Nierenberg, Interim Dean of the University of Chicago School of Theology.